this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Big thank you to everybody that watched the last episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated. Apologies that there wasn't an episode of the show last week. I'm afraid I had a family issue that I had to deal with, and that same issue will probably mean there won't be an episode of the show next week either. So apologies in advance for that. Sometimes life gets in the way of art, doesn't it, as they say, or is it life imitates art, or something of that ilk. Anyway, but however, I'm here. It's today, it's Sunday, and everything's fairly normal, shall we say. Well, as normal as it ever can be, I suppose. Anyway, as you well know, January is a bit of a kind of like a dead month. In that not a lot tends to happen. Distilleries tend to sort of either in the process of kind of figuring out what they're going to be doing for the next 12 months, or they've already decided and are laying the plans and the groundwork. Same with independent bottlers and all that kind of stuff. So it was a good opportunity for me just to grab half a dozen random distillery bottled samples and do an episode of the show. I seem to have an inordinate number of samples, as you well know. I had a big clear out the other week and got rid of quite an awful lot that were never going to get used, and some of them, like I said, were so old they just kind of like evaporated into absolute nothing, or sludge, as the case may be. So I thought, look, right, maybe that's going to be the theme for this year, is just trying to do as many historic or use up old samples as possible. I mean, obviously I like to do kind of up-to-date sort of things, as you well know. It's certainly when one gets sent samples, it's always a bit rude not to use them, but all of these samples have not actually been sent to me at all from any of the distilleries. They've all been ones that I've collected over the course of last year or so. Well, with the exception of actually the Benromach. That sample, I believe, did come from the distillery. But anyway, all the rest I've kind of collected, so I can say what I feel like, I suppose, to a certain extent. Well, I mean, I always say that anyway, but, you know, there's... I mean, there never is any sort of... As you well know, there's no kind of hand of a distillery on my shoulder, sort of guiding one's comments and thought processes, as you well know. And for those of you that don't and are maybe new to the channel, all the opinions are wholly my own. They have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me, and they have no bearing or relevance to anybody else, in actual fact. You know, obviously one doesn't like to sort of review crap, but you know, every now and again I will indeed sort of endeavour to sort of review things that are maybe not sort of completely 100% and point out the issues, because at the end of the day the whisky industry, I think, certainly needs to be held to account for certain things. Not everything is rosy in the garden, and I've kind of in the back of my mind I have an episode of the show that I'd like to do just to prove that fact, and I know you love it when I do those kind of episodes, so you never know, one of those might come along in the not too distant future. Anyway, enough waffle, enough rabbiting. Let's just have a look at what I'm going to be tasting. Okay, so we're going to kick off with the Royal Lochnagar 12-year-old, bottled at a unfortunate 40%, so chill filtered, coloured, and well, yeah, I've never been the world's biggest fan of Royal Lochnagar. It does kind of... I've often found that they try and make a kind of quite meaty, robust spirit, worm tubs, all that kind of stuff, but they try and do a sort of like a balance, a bit like kind of Oban, insofar that they do a slower distillation, try and enhance the copper contact. I believe the worm tubs are filled with fairly warmish water, so they're trying to get that lovely kind of balance between big, rich and meaty and sort of elegant. Now, in Oban's terms, it does tend to work, but sometimes, well, I'm not going to say any more. We'll get to Royal Lochnagar when we get there. Next bottling, Old Pulteney 18-year-old, now definitely bottled at 46%. I believe a combination of American oak and sherry. Then we're going to look at said Benromach. This is the cask strength batch 1. Which was released in 2021. It was distilled in 2010 and bottled at 58.5%, wholly aged in a combination of first fill bourbon and first fill Oloroso. But looking at the colour, the sherry component doesn't look like it's too heavy, so going to be interesting. Perennial favourite or disappointment, depending upon how you view it, Talisker 10-year-old. So this is a relatively new bottling, as it has the new label. I believe bottled last year, 45.8%. Now, I've always loved Talisker, and I've equally hated it as well. Certainly the 10-year-old, it's kind of, there are times when it is an absolute joy, a delight, a classic, and there are other times when it's just too heavy on the sherry, you know, just stomped under the boot of sherry. And it's been so sort of, every time I taste it, it's different. It is kind of so inconsistent a bottling, it's untrue. I mean, you know, there was a period of time where it just seemed to go through this big sherry phase, which was really quite dull, and it lacked that sort of lovely windswept intensity. And then they brought out the Storm, which kind of like, it's like, well, yeah, all right, I know it's kind of younger spirit and it's a bit kind of raw, but it said more Talisker to me than what the 10-year-old had done. But anyway, we'll see what this bottling brings us. Penultimate bottling, Caol Ila 18-year-old, bottled at 43%. I don't think this particular bottling is available at the moment, and which does surprise me, considering I would have thought that Diageo's got plenty of stock of aged Caol Ila, but I don't know is the honest answer. Always been a big fan of Caol Ila. And saving the best to last, arguably my favourite and possibly the best, in inverted commas, bottling of Lagavulin, the 12-year-old, bottled at cask strength. This is the Special Releases 2021 bottling, aged in refill American oak, bottled at 56.5%. Now I say possibly the best. Obviously old Lagavulin is stunning, but let's be honest, old Lagavulin is just going to crucify your purse and your wallet and your bank account. And I mean, you can argue that the 12-year-olds is, you know, ridiculously priced for a 12-year-old, but you know, it's still almost within the bounds of affordability. It's probably a sort of like pushing the boat out level of affordability, but still I honestly believe that is probably the ultimate bottling of Lagavulin, so I'm hoping that that one doesn't actually disappoint. So yeah, I think interesting lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of Royal Lochnagar. Okay, so let's kick off with the Royal Lochnagar. Let's see what those give us then, shall we? It smells like whiskey. Yeah, I know it's a bit of a crass thing to say, but it really is a kind of, there's a bit of boiled sweet sherry, there's a bit of barley, there's a bit of honey. It kind of resides for me in the same kind of grouping as things like Cardew. Nice, but frankly a bit dull. Yeah, sort of, it's Tim, nice but dim, isn't it really? It's just kind of, it's simple, it smells like whiskey. It's inoffensive. You're not gonna hate it. You're not gonna sort of love it. You're not gonna go, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's, like I said, it's frankly pretty dull. And it just goes to show that sometimes when you are working with extremes, as in sort of trying to sort of, you know, create a rich malty sulphury new make and then balance it with some, you know, elegance, you can sometimes end up just cancelling everything out, and you end up with this. Anyway, let's see what it passes out. Well, it really is complexity challenged, isn't it, at the end of the day? Dull. I mean, it's all right. I mean, you know, like I said, you know, you're never going to go, this is a bad whiskey, because it isn't. It tastes like a whiskey. I get barley, I get a bit of honey, I get a bit of boiled sweet sherry. It's kind of whiskey by numbers. Absolutely inoffensive. Nothing wrong with it. You'd quite happily drink it, and you probably wouldn't even notice. So you know, in that instance, it is pretty dull stuff. But you know, if you were kind of given a bottle of that as a present, you'd probably go, okay. It's certainly not one you'd want to use as a toilet cleaner, should we say. There are a lot of others you probably would, but that one, yeah, you could just drink that and just not notice it. So yeah, there you go. Right, okay, let's move on to the old Pulteney 18. I've just rubbished the Royal Lochnagar. Am I going to do the same for the Pulteney? Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Well, that's nice. Always loved the, well, I say always loved the 18. The 18 obviously hadn't been around for that long, obviously replacing the 17. And again, the 17 was never a bottling that I really warmed to. Again, far too variable in the use of sherry. This is beautifully balanced. Lovely barley. It's got a sort of maturity to it. It's got a bit of salt, a little bit of sherry, some dusty, sawdusty American oak, earth, a slight herbal nuance. But just gorgeously balanced. The sherry is just there, and it's just sort of adding a little bit of dried fruit. It's augmenting, which is what I always want from a whiskey that's been aged in a combination of casks. Doesn't matter what the casks are. It's just balanced, and this is supremely balanced. It is stunning. Okay, the old 21 was an absolute gorgeous whiskey. It was arguably my favourite. Well, no, I think the Pulteney 40 kind of blew it away, I think, but again, silly money. The old 21 was just an absolutely gorgeous whiskey, and I mean, and that was all American oak. But like I said, absolutely spot on with their use of sherry casks in the 18. So that's right. Wow, is that a gorgeous mouthful. Kicks off with that lovely kind of fresh, salty, coastal barley character. In comes some mature American oak, a little bit of sawdust, touch of honey and malt, and it fills out wonderfully on the mid palate. A little bit of dried fruit from the sherry, touch of toastiness, some spice. Again, that slight herbal nuance right on the aftertaste. Length is stunning, absolutely stunning. It is a gorgeous whiskey. And it's funny, not so long ago, when I did a whiskey tasting evening in the shop, I thought, let's put the 12-year-old on. I hadn't tasted the 12-year-old in a long time, and my bet was that a lot of everybody else hadn't tasted the 12-year-old. The thing is, we often tend to get away from some of the sort of classic whiskies that maybe got us into whiskey. We're always searching for the next thing, you know, the next weird and wonderful thing, the next level of complexity, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes we kind of forget about some of the, I wouldn't say simple pleasures, because the 12-year-old is actually pretty complex in my personal opinion. But sometimes we kind of lose sight of the fact that some of the whiskies that maybe got us into whiskey are just bloody good, and you should go back to them. But anyway, that's sight aside, I suppose. But coming back to the 18-year-old, I mean, you know, still, like I said, I mean, this is only just about on the verge of sort of affordability, but still, you know, stunning. Okay, so let's move on to the Benromach cask strength. So this, I think, replaced the old cask strength 10-year-old, even though it's roughly about 10 years old. And the old 10-year-old obviously had some variation, so it'll be interesting to see what this is like. Quite heavily peated by Benromach standards in actual fact, although we're not talking kind of Lagavulin levels of peat. Still, it's really quite noticeable. There's some dried fruit, sultana, raisins, nice combination of light and dark dried fruits, touch of chocolate, dark chocolate, spice, malt. There's a sort of astringency just there in the background, almost more mineral astringency as opposed to salty astringency, but there is a little bit of salt. Obviously that's coming from the peat. That's a lovely nose. That's really, again, really well balanced. Not too heavily sherried, a little bit more sherry influence than say the Pulteney, But I've always loved Benromach. It's when the balance is right. I just think, you know, the 10-year-old Benromach is just sort of like just such a classic go-to whiskey. It has a little bit of everything, a little bit of American oak, a little bit of sherry, a little bit of peat, and nothing's going to sort of like, you know, you're not going to be disappointed by the Benromach 10. And I think they're just in the process of bringing out batch 2 of this now, which I'm hoping I will get a sample of, please, because this is gorgeous, lovely. And although it, like I said, it's 58%, you know, getting close to 60%, you wouldn't have thought that from the nose. I mean, no alcohol prickle, no nothing. Anyway, let's see what it passes like. Opens up with a little bit more of the gritty Oloroso tannins, dark dried fruits. Alcohol is enhancing the tannins and the spices. Peat comes through more towards the sort of late mid palate back end. Not getting so much of the American oak character. It is more kind of focused on the sherry. The American oak is there, just about sort of on the mid palate, and again it has that kind of tight, gritty kind of feeling, which I think is probably more down to the ABV rather than anything else. So we're going to put a little drop of water with it. I still think that is a lovely whiskey, lots of complexity, although I think the nose shows more complexity than the palate. That's nice. That's kind of opened it up quite nicely now, getting kind of juicy orange fruits. Also, again, less sherry, although the nose didn't show a huge amount of sherry to start off with. But I'm getting more American oak character now, more barley, a little less peat. Maybe a slight soapiness there, just right on the edge, just, yeah, possibly. Might be the fact that the sample's a bit old, because I don't remember that. But yeah, a really nice, really good nose. Let's see what it passes like now. Full, rich, juicy, more American oak character now, more barley, less sherry. Sherry still noticeable. Nice twang on the edge of the tongue. Again, minerality, a little bit of almost salty minerality. Dry peat, dusty, herbal-ish kind of peat. Really complex, really intense. Love that. Prefer it with a little drop of water, but that's again one of the wonderful things about cask strength whiskies is the flexibility that they give you. You don't just basically have it presented to you on a plate. You can play around with it to your heart's content and get the sort of like, you know, the balance just to your taste. So if batch 2 is anything as good as that batch, then and I don't think it was too expensive either. I'm trying to remember how much it was retailing for. I think sort of 40-50 quid-ish kind of area. So yeah, all right, we're not talking sort of bargain basement whiskey, but I don't think there is anything such as a bargain basement bottle of whiskey these days. And so yeah, I think that's very, very impressive. Right, okay, so Talisker 10 time. Let's see what we're going to get from this one then, shall we? Okay, and not as much sherry as there has been in previous bottlings. It's got that sort of lovely, oily, sort of herbal kind of character. It's got sweet barley, it's got some coastal freshness, but it's also got some rich, darker malt at its core. Not too peaty. It's got a sort of a slight astringency, touch of dark chocolate, and again the sherry is just way back in the mix. It's kind of again augmenting. I mean, this is how, I mean, again, it's not kind of got that wild character of Talisker that I remember from 20 odd years ago. It is a little bit more polite. But then again, in the range, this is where things like the Storm come in. It's kind of got its you know, failings, for want of a better word, but you get that intensity. I suppose you could argue that the Talisker 10 has become slightly more grown up. It's got a bit more sort of like around the mid palate, the mid palate, around yeah, it's got a bit fat and flabby, but you know, that's not to its complete detriment. God dear me, I'm sort of, yeah, praising one hand, as they say. No, overall, this particular bottling, yeah, it's not too shabby. Let's see what the pass on. A little bit more sherry, but not too much. It's not blanketing. I still get the barley, I get a little bit of peat, I get a little bit of saltiness. The dried fruit's quite soft. Again, the finish is very soft, which is not the sort of thing you would tend to associate with Talisker, really. I mean, I've always thought of as Talisker, like I said, a bit like Bamore, you know, wild, windswept, hairs on your chest, and that's what they were originally, 20 odd years ago when I first started in the whisky industry. Bamore, Talisker, that was what they gave you. And like nowadays, they're a little bit more sort of, yeah, sitting back in the armchair, a bit more sort of safer, I would say. Possibly. I mean, it's still a good whiskey. It's still a lovely malt. Don't get me wrong about that. I mean, there's enough kind of coastal notes there, as long as the sherry is kind of dialed down, which in this particular bottling it is, to make it interesting, to make it a lovely malt, something to savour. Yeah, all right. It's not what it was once upon a time, but then, as we know, whiskies do have a tendency to change, and distilleries, you know, recognise that fact and tend to sort of play around with their range to kind of like, you know, not mitigate that, but to kind of like give the customer, I suppose, you know, what they want at the end of the day. So, you know, if you like the kind of the softness with a slight edge of the 10, then brilliant. If you want something with a bit more edge to it, and you're prepared to sort of accept a little bit of roughness, and you like maybe getting down and dirty a little bit, then you go for something like the Storm. So yeah, you can't sort of criticise a distillery for at least, you know, attempting to kind of embrace everybody's desires to a certain extent. But on the whole, coming back to this particular bottling of, excuse me, ooh, it's having its revenge there. This particular bottling of 10-year-old is actually not too bad at all, so I really quite enjoyed it. But then maybe I was because I'm middle-aged. Oh. Right, okay, as you can see, the black Glencairn is back. Just these glasses just do not like. I mean, this one still has got a crack in it, so that's going to go before too much longer. Anyway, you don't really need to see the colour of the Caol Ila 18, do you? Oh, is that gorgeous? I mean, there's something to be said about old Caol Ila. I mean, there's something to be said about Caol Ila. It's so kind of like consistent. Although I will say I have tasted some crap bottlings of Caol Ila, and one of them may well turn up in a tasting in a not too distant future. Because I can think of one that I tasted last year that was kind of a real shock to the system. Oh, it's just mature, seeped apricot, dusty peat, earthy peat, lightly coastal, slightly astringent there. Touch of honey. A little bit of green fruit, sort of lime, green gauge. There's a lovely herbal note coming through as well. Almost kind of, I mean, like I said, it's not kind of, again, this is not Caol Ila of 20 odd years ago. It's a lot weightier, a lot more fatter. There is that slight sort of, I mean, I always used to remember Caol Ila had this kind of garden pea-like freshness, with a sort of, that kind of herbally, kind of almost mintiness. I don't kind of get mint in this, but I get kind of, almost kind of marjoram. I mean, I don't know where the hell that comes from, but it's stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, the peat is so elegant and delicate, it's not in your face. this is just such a sort of like, you know, sit back, relax, kind of like, you know, when you want something peated but you don't want it to sort of like, you know, bite your face off, then this just gives it to you in a more subtler way, shall we say. You'll take that how you will. Palate. Elegant, delicate, but oh, that's got a little bit of a fishy coastal edge, and a little bit of astringency with the peat, but it kind of opens up with that kind of almost kind of apricot richness, a little bit of oxidised fruit, some dustiness. Again, as is Caol Ila's want, not an awful lot of oak character. You just don't get it with Caol Ila for obvious reasons. Again, it's got that herbalness on the mid palate. Again, I'm getting that almost kind of marjoram-y kind of character. Maybe it's sort of minty marjoram, possibly, but rich, honeyed, lovely length, lingering, drier but coastal peat, dusty but not too overly peaty. I mean, it's just the epitome of, I can't speak. It's got to me, the epitome. It's just very elegant, all right. Elegant but sort of robust at the same time. I mean, it's just, it plays to all those kind of characteristics, and I love that. I mean, yeah, hopefully Diageo will bring it back fairly shortly. Like I said, I can't believe that they don't have sort of mature enough stocks of Caol Ila to... but then again, I mean, they sell it all off, don't they? I mean, you know, everybody and their mother buys Caol Ila. It's one of those distilleries that Diageo is more than happy to sell. So maybe there is a kind of like a bit of a hole in their inventory. Who knows? But, you know... hopefully the oak team will come back fairly shortly. But one imagines it will come back with a bloody silly price tag, because I mean it wasn't cheap to start off with. But anyway, damn good.
Try every minute and every second, cause you've got only one life.
Right, okay, so let's finish off with a bit of that Lagavulin then, shall we? Let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Oh, it's a gorgeous nose. I mean, that is just... stunning. It's full, it's oily, lots of oily charry peat, touch of fresh barley, a little bit of sawdust, although the oak, again, like Caol Ila, is pretty subtle, so we're talking loads and loads of spirit character, and it has a lovely weight to it, along with that sort of coastal freshness, and herbal peat. And the trouble is, I mean, I just don't understand why everybody goes on and on and on about the bloody 16-year-old. It's just kind of peat and sherry, and it's kind of, you taste this and you realise that Lagavulin is nuanced. It's not just peat and sherry. There's a bit of bog myrtle, a bit of chocolate, citrus. It's gorgeously complex. It really is amazing spirit. And yet Diageo kind of like throw bucket loads of sherry at it, and I mean, you've got to say, well, thank you for bottling it with that, you know, without sherry. I mean, you know, because it gives you a completely different view of the distillery, and it gives you the purity of the distillery, and you get all of the character of the spirit, and the character of the spirit is just frankly gorgeous. So if you can't afford the 12, because the 12 is silly money, buy the 8. More than happy to sell the 8. I mean, I don't even really bother with the 16-year-old. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, if customers want to purchase 16, fine, no problem with that. You know, if they want a recommendation, I don't even go near it, because, you know, why bother when, you know, the 12 and to a certain extent the 8-year-old, oh, it's just stunning. I mean, it really is. Let's go pass on. Yep, you can notice that alcohol. Finish is a bit masked, but my God, that's a great palate. Oily, peaty, slightly tarry. Again, a little bit of medicinal beet, a little bit of iodine, a little bit of salt. Quite a lot of salt in actual fact. It's really tingling on my tongue. Slightly herbal as well. Again, rich, full. I mean, you know, there's so many people just never see the character of Lagavulin. They don't know what Lagavulin tastes like. They just think Lagavulin's just always bloody sherry. And in the pantheon of Islay distilleries, it just has its place. You know, and this is the wonderful thing about all the distilleries on Islay. They all have their individual character. You know, you can point to them and go, you know, Ardbeg has the woodiness and so on and so forth, and Lagavulin has the weight and the intensity, even get some barley notes as well, a little bit of citrus, a little bit of sort of dry saltiness. You know, is there a bit of meat there? Is there a little bit of meat? Possibly. Not smoked meat, cured meat possibly. That's just so complex. And why do you want to bloody well drink it when it's been smothered in sherry? I mean, you know, it's just I don't get it. I don't get it at all. I mean, yes, I'm a purist, and this is what I want. I want the distillery character. I want the distillery to tell me what it's all about at the end of the day. I don't want sort of, you know, cask character and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's just, to me, that's just noise. A little bit sweeter now on the nose, a little bit more barley, some almost sugary kind of, I wouldn't quite go as far as saying warty notes, but it's got that slight sugariness. It's just, again, lovely juiciness, citrus, a little bit less peat, still more coastal I get, I think, with a drop of water. Softer peat, still got that sort of like astringency. It's still that lovely astringency. That's stunning. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. See what that's like. It is a symphony on the palate. I mean, you have the sort of rich, dense, slightly oily sort of character at the core. You have the saltiness of peat, the citrus, more salt. It is sublime. And, you know, like I said, so many people just kind of like go peat and sherry and 16 and, you know, just kind of ignore the fact that in actual, that the reality is in American oak, it sings. It's just gorgeous. And like I said, you know, forget the 16-year-old. If you can't afford the 12-year-old, which I can't, buy the 8-year-old. I mean, the 8-year-old is still pretty expensive, but you know, if you must have Lagavulin, buy it without sherry. I mean, just experience the wonderful character of the distillery. And at the end of the day, that's where I'm at. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I suppose. You know, I come from a wine background. I like terroir. I like the character of the combination of terroir and sort of typicity, and I apply exactly the same kind of standards to whiskey. You know, it's all about, you know, it's like, you know, a distillery goes to a lot of trouble to produce a certain style of spirit. Throughout the whole production process, you know, as we well know, you know, whiskey is kind of made up of the components all along the way, from kind of fermentation right the way through to distillation, and yet so much of it kind of ends up being masked by some kind of cask or other, you know. And like I said, you know, I always recommend that you try and seek out a distillery bottling or an independent bottling that's been aged wholly in American oak, to at least kind of understand what the distillery is trying to do with its spirit. And you know, you will be kind of blown away, because sometimes, you know, you just don't see it. and with the Lagavulin, I mean, that is just absolutely stunning whiskey. So yeah. Right, okay, so let's sum this week's episode of the show. Now, I know the bulk of you guys that kind of watch the show kind of almost to a certain extent subscribe to my kind of world view of whiskey. So to a certain extent, I'm kind of preaching to the converted. But for those of you that sort of are new to whiskey, maybe new to the channel, that kind of thing, like I said, you know, if you can kind of find the purest form of whatever distillery it is you're kind of looking at, I would suggest you kind of like pick that up and at least try and figure out what the distillery is kind of trying to say. In kind of Royal Lochnagar's case, I have got no idea what they're trying to do. Well, I do know what they're trying to do. They're trying to create the kind of O'Banny-esque kind of whiskey, the sort of the blend, well, not the blend, the balance between the sort of richness and the elegance, and like I said, I think it kind of ends up kind of almost negating each other, and you end up with kind of homogeny. You know, it's not their fault. You know, it happens. Some people love Royal Lochnagar, but yeah. Old Pulteney 18, absolutely gorgeous whiskey. If you want a textbook whiskey that shows how to use sherry casks with American oak casks, by the 18-year-old, gorgeous. And to a certain extent, you can argue this. You could say the same about the Benromach as well. Again, lovely balance of American oak and sherry casks. The Talisker 10, like I said, this particular bottling quite nicely balanced. Not too much sherry, but of course you never really know at the end of the day. It's a bit of a lottery. You buy a bottle of 10-year-old, you don't know what you're kind of going to get. But you know, this particular one turned out okay, as they say. Caol Ila 18, absolutely stunning. If you can find it, if it's going to come back, which I imagine it probably will do. I wouldn't say it's the ultimate expression of Caol Ila, but it's a lovely expression of Caol Ila nevertheless. And Lagavulin 12-year-old, like I said, if you want to experience the intensity, the real character of Lagavulin, buy this bottle. Save your pennies up and buy it, because you will not be disappointed. You know, forget the 16, forget all the heavy sherry, buy that particular bottling. So stunning stuff, as they say. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I think it's been pretty interesting. Like I said, it's kind of horses for courses at the end of the day, and you know, hopefully you'll sort of, you know, pick up a few of these bottlings, give them a try, see what you think. You know, you may well agree with me, you may well not, but anyway, that's the wonderful thing about whiskey. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.